this week we are joined by the Chief Executive Officer of the Malawi Electoral Commission, Mr. Sam Alufandika. Of course, it's so relevant that he's joined us today because, as you know, we recently launched the elections just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, meaning it's on, the heat is on. It's time for us to start preparing to go to the polls come May 2019. But because of that, it means there are a number of issues which we would want ironed out, which is why we brought the man at the top, the CEO himself, to answer a few questions. Mr. Alufandika, thank you so much for joining us. A pleasure to have you in our studios for the first time, I think.
Yes, the first time.
First time. You've been hiding away from us.
Sure. The media is not friendly most of the time.
Really? Really?
Yes.
But we've got you now, though. We've got you now.
Very much so. I have no choice this time around.
Fantastic stuff.
Thank you.
All right. So I know your background has been mainly in the NGO sector prior to coming back to MEC. And you were with UN Women before you came back to MEC as this Chief Executive Officer. So perhaps I think before we start getting into the nitty-gritties of the elections, can you give us a brief sort of update or portfolio of your professional capacity and your background?
Thank you so much. After graduating from Chancellor College with a bachelor's degree in economics, I joined the teaching profession. It was so brief. That was 1994, January to June. And then I left the teaching profession to join the Office of the President and Cabinet as Administrative Officer.
Right.
I rose to the rank of Principal Administrative Officer a few years later. And in between, within the Office of the President, I left briefly to work in the Malawi Social Action Fund as Deputy Director of Administration. I took unpaid leave with the Office of the President and Cabinet. And then I went back to the Office of the President and Cabinet,
right,
where I worked until 2002. And then I left the OPC to join the Malawi Electoral Commission as the Regional Elections Officer responsible for the Central Region. So my office was in Lilongwe. I worked with the Malawi Electoral Commission from 2002 to 2007 in that capacity before leaving to join the Board of Case Handling Institutions, where unfortunately I worked briefly as well because I had to be hired by UNDP immediately after getting the news that I had left the Malawi Electoral Commission.
Right, okay.
The UNDP wanted me to head the electoral program, which I did from 2007 to May to June 2009 after elections in the general elections in 2009. So that was the beginning of my UN career.
I see. Okay.
Yes.
And then you ended up with UN Women.
No, I worked briefly with Orphan Support Africa as Africa Director,
Okay.
Executive Director, before leaving and joined the international UN career in Nigeria. I was heading the electoral program in Nigeria as well, UNDP.
I see.
From Nigeria, I went to Jordan, where I was working for UNDP, right, but based in Jordan, as head of the electoral program as well. And then we moved the office to Baghdad, the war-torn city, where I continued to head the electoral program.
So you were actually operating from Baghdad?
Yes,
wow,
in Baghdad.
Okay.
Yes, and when ISIS was coming in, I was one of the first people to be evacuated from Baghdad and went back to Jordan, Amman.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So from there, I had a brief also career with the UNDP Afghanistan. They had their presidential elections in 2014, and they were not generally accepted, the results, especially the presidential one. And then the UN was asked to do a recount of votes in Afghanistan. I was one of the 100+ UN staff from all over the world to go and do a recount, which we did and successfully came up with an acceptable winner in Afghanistan.
I see.
The current president. Yes.
Okay.
So I came back to Malawi towards the end of 2015, where I now joined the UN Women on a consultancy basis as a governance specialist, mainly looking at issues of gender and elections, gender-based budgeting, political participation of women and inclusive decision-making processes in Malawi.
Okay.
Yes, that was the main area of focus for me.
Before you then were chosen to now head this very esteemed institution, the Malawi Electoral Commission, on home soil. Now,
yes, for your information, I was also appointed for the same position after undergoing successful interviews in 2011. The appointment came in 2012. By that time, I had already left the country.
Okay.
For Jordan, so I did not take up the post.
All right.
Yes.
In other words, you could have actually perhaps assumed the role a bit earlier. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, given such a decorated background, such a decorated professional career, you must have very refined expertise in the electoral processes and the electoral understanding. Given that knowledge and your experience in different parts of the world, the Middle East, etc., what to you are the immediate challenges that the Malawi Electoral Commission is facing at the moment?
Not so many challenges. Broadly speaking, I think Malawi has been holding one of the acceptable elections. Acceptable? Internationally. There hasn't been any situation where international observers and even local observers have said this election is not acceptable. So we have to kind of pat ourselves on the back for that one. You know, in other countries there have been elections which haven't been accepted. Yeah. And sometimes they have to undergo a rerun of the same election just to make sure they're acceptable.
Having said that, acceptable doesn't necessarily make them perhaps ideal, though. You've used a very, your choice of language is operative there. The fact that you said acceptable. You haven't necessarily said that things have gone perfectly or smoothly. Always.
In most elections, there is nothing like a perfect election. There are hitches, technically, administratively, logistical hitches. In any elections, anywhere in the world, even in the USA, we talk of Britain, no perfect elections are expected. But you know, at the end of the day, at the end of the electoral process, the process has to be accepted. The results have to be accepted generally by the country, yes. Okay, so and that's what has been happening in Malawi.
Okay, that's fundamental, but that's not to say that you don't have challenges, because we'll be doing our viewers and indeed Malawians a disservice to say that there aren't challenges. So that's
there are always challenges.
What to you are the challenges?
There are always challenges. For example, in the 2014 elections, I think you are aware that there were a lot of logistical challenges.
Yes.
A lot of things missing during polling day. Ballot papers misplaced, and the ballot boxes not adequate. People had to use buckets in some places. And you are aware that in some polling stations, they could not open the centers. They had to vote the following day. Those were logistical. Yes. But at the end of the day, remedial measures were taken to ensure that everybody who wanted to vote has voted, and the results were out in good time. I think that was the most important thing that happened in 2014.
In 2014, Ms. Alufandika, we literally ended up voting for 3 days as a result of some of these logistical challenges. Can you safely say confidently that we're not going to experience this again in 2019?
Not at all. This will not be experienced. 3 days, not in all centers. Very few centers experienced that.
But nonetheless, it happened, and it was unprecedented.
It happened, and it wasn't acceptable. Yes, those are the logistical challenges I mentioned about. And it's because Malawi was holding a tripartite election for the first time. And these challenges were bound to happen. But after implementing that first tripartite election, in 2019, we implement the same, but at a very, very high gear, because we have learned from our past, and we have corrected all the mistakes that were there in 2014.
Okay, let me ask you this. To what extent are you confident in our electoral processes? I think just generally speaking now, and our system, because obviously, like I've said, you clearly told us in the beginning how much experience you have. Given that experience, how confident are you that Malawi is at a point where you can be safely confident in our electoral processes, particularly from an operational point of view, because that is your area, operations?
Thank you so much. I think the most important thing that Malawi has as an advantage as compared to other electoral management bodies or other countries are the enabling electoral laws that we have. Mm-hmm. Our laws are one of the best in the world. You know, we are one of the few countries who may know, even without being told by the Malawi Electoral Commission, that the next election will be on this date. In other countries, it's an ambush. People don't know, and one person holds the key for that country to have elections or not. In Malawi, we know.
Mm-hmm. I think, can I just respond to that?
Yes.
I think, given what you've just said, I think that's probably why, as Malawians, we tend to be baffled and puzzled. When it does come to the time when we are supposed to go to the polls, it seems like there was poor planning. When, like you rightly said, you know well ahead of time when we're going to hold these elections. So it would suggest that you have inside information, so planning should be perfect. So why is it we tend to experience these problems?
Everybody knows the next date of elections immediately after the election, or even now we can tell when the next elections will be after the 2019 tripartite elections. That's the plus.
So why is planning always poor?
Planning is not poor, but you know, you can plan. Within the planning aspect, there has to be adequate resources mobilized to implement your plan fully. If you struggle to get money and other important resources like vehicles to conduct your election, you are in a problem. And I think in 2014, that was one of the areas that was a big challenge. The budget was not fully funded, and the Malawi Electoral Commission never got the vehicles that were required to conduct that election, especially the polling. So that posed quite a bit of a challenge for the institution.
Okay.
Yes. So it's not a question of poor planning, but...
Are you sure?
It's a question of whether the plans that you have on institutions are backed by the resources to implement those plans.
But then again, Mr. Alufandika, look, given the scale of an election, presumably one would imagine that you tend to also plan for contingencies. In the event that things are not going to go right in an election, you would also always want to have contingencies. Now, this time round, for example, 2019, have you identified the contingency plans to counter these kind of challenges that you're talking about?
Very much so.
So we're not going to hear about a lack of vehicles this time round? We have
the contingencies. Like, for example, the question of vehicles. We rely on vehicles from government. But as Electoral Commission, we are saying, if we cannot get enough vehicles from government and other institutions, we should be able to hire to ensure that we have enough vehicles to operate with.
All right.
So that component is there. That's the contingency we're talking about.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk about the actual process now. I think 2019 is going to see the use of biometrics. Am I right?
Yes.
And again, that's unprecedented. It's going to be the first time that we're going to go full scale with biometric details. I wonder, how prepared are your personnel to deal with that process? Because it means training. What investment have you made in terms of training personnel, but also what have you done to sensitize the public to understand this new process that's now going to involve biometrics, given that we're 13 months away? Do Malawians understand biometrics in that respect?
Thank you very much. First, I have to indicate or to state that the change from the manual registration system to biometric voter registration system is a positive change.
Absolutely.
Any change that the Malawi Electoral Commission brings or initiates is supposed to improve on the credibility of the electoral process in the country. There is no change that is not positive in our view. So this is one of the changes that will bring or add on the credibility of the electoral processes in Malawi. from
that may be
2019
so,
and beyond.
but are people ready for it? It might be a good thing, but are we ready for it? Have we trained staff and have we sensitized Malawians?
The Malawi Electoral Commission is ready to implement this. For your information,
so you haven't yet done it?
This is ready, 100% ready. For your information, this is a very simple voter registration process than the other one that we've been using before. Very simple and fast. A lot of people will be processed, will be registered in a very short time. That's one. Two, those who will be working on the
personnel,
the personnel
yes,
in the registration centers will find it very easy.
But you're not answering the question, Ms. Alufandika.
The question,
have you trained
I'm
them?
coming to that. The training has already taken place.
Okay.
We are sensitizing at the moment the general public. Okay. We have started with the internal staff in the MEC. All of them have been sensitized on the biometric voter registration. Secondly, we have gone down to our honorable members of parliament. You know, they are a very important stakeholder in the electoral process. Right. Went to the parliament last week on Wednesday to do that. Okay. They have appreciated the process. And then we'll go down to other key stakeholders like the media and the general populace.
Yes.
The idea is to make everybody understand where we are going, why we are doing that, and the advantages.
Okay.
You know, the...
And how are you doing that? How are you making people understand that? That's what I'm asking.
We are bringing the equipment and we are demonstrating how it will be done, the product. So it's a live kind of sensitization.
Are you touring the country doing that? Is that what you mean?
Yes, we are doing that.
Right.
Yes. And so it's a live demonstration on the entire process of biometric voter registration.
And when do you envisage you'll have completed that process? Because like I said, we're 13 months away. Malawi has, 28, 29, maybe 30 districts now. How are you going to, by when will you have finished this process?
We'll finish by end of next month. Everybody should have been aware of where we are going in terms of biometric voter registration. And then we'll go live in terms of registering people, end of May.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we look at the issue of funding, Mr. Alufandika, I think that's probably one of the biggest issues at the moment. You spoke about funding and how you need to have the resources. Where are we in terms of funding? But also, you gave, when you launched the election, we were told that it was going to cost at least 42 billion kwacha for these elections to be carried out.
Yes.
An eye-watering sum of money, especially when you compare it to what was used in 2014, which was in the region of 18 million kwacha. That is almost double, more than double the amount that was spent then. Even given inflation, etc., etc., it's still a large sum of money to comprehend we would need for these elections. Can you justify this cost?
Thank you very much. First, I have to correct you. In 2014, it wasn't 18 billion kwacha.
How much was it?
It was more than that, and we are still struggling to pay our
service
providers. At the moment, we cannot even establish the final figure because we have to clear all our debts that came out because we never had adequate budget in the Malawi Electoral Commission. That is one of the challenges we had. And that affected the implementation of the electoral process in 2014. So yes, 18 billion was provided, or more than that, but that was not adequate. That's why we are still struggling. Vehicles impounded by sheriffs because you cannot pay some creditors. That shows you that that budget was not adequate. So to compare this budget and the 2014 one, that's the first mistake that people are making. Secondly, I have to say that elections are expensive. Yes, it's 42 billion. We have shared that with the stakeholders in the electoral process. It was not 42 billion.
How much was it?
It was far more than that, maybe around 60 billion, and it has been slashed over and over again to come to that. For one reason, you know, for any institution to fully implement its plan, it needs resources that are within the planned activities. This is what the MEC has envisaged, that this is the adequate budget for the elections.
All right. I'm going to wait a minute,
yes,
Mr. Alufandika. I'm just going to have to stop you there, unfortunately. We need you to go to break. But when we come back, I will continue on that point that you've just raised there. And we'll continue the discussion on the budget. But we have to take a short break.
Thank you.
If you're just tuning in, you're watching this week's edition of Times Exclusive with me, Wezi Kasambala. Today, I'm talking to the Malawi Electoral Commission Chief Executive Officer, Sam Alufandika. Welcome back. You're watching Times Exclusive, brought to you by Rainbow Paints here on Times TV, and I'm, of course, Wezi Kasambala. Today, I'm talking to the Malawi Electoral Commission Chief Executive Officer, the man responsible, effectively, for operations when we think of elections, and that is Sam Alufandika. Before we went to break, Mr. Alufandika, we were talking about the 42 billion kwacha, which was revealed as budgeted for these elections. And you've come under quite a bit of criticism from a number of quarters, including organizations like Mezzin and the executive director there, Steve Dua, who has queried the amount, saying it seemed rather bloated and rather extravagant. And you were giving me justification by saying we cannot compare the amount we spent in 2014 to what we're going to spend today. But it's still a reference point, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yes, it is. It is a reference point. But, you know, the 2014 elections are not the same with the 2019 ones. For your information, we have added over 500 centers. Those translate to new personnel within those centers, new ballot boxes, and every other thing that is sent to a polling center. That is an added cost. So it's not the same. The background is not the same.
But you can understand why some quarters would be rather concerned that the amount would more than double.
Let me give you an example. Zimbabwe is holding elections in July. It's almost the same. Zimbabwe is almost the same as Malawi. They may even have less voting population than Malawi, but their budget is 60 billion Malawi kwacha equivalent. Same things we are doing, same election. Elections are the same. And, you know, when you are talking of cost of elections, when you are saying this is high, you have to compare with what other countries are spending, because elections are the same, whether they are in Zimbabwe or Zambia. Those people are saying this is too high. Have they compared with other countries, how much they spend? Because if you do that, you may find that Malawi is actually holding a cheaper election than the other countries, but our voters, our voting population is higher than other countries that are spending more on.
But that might follow logically anyway, Mr. Alufandika, because given Malawi's tiny economy, we wouldn't be expected to be splashing out the same amount of money in elections than a country that has more developed or has a better performing economy.
Exactly.
So that wouldn't make sense anyway.
Exactly.
And Zimbabwe, you're saying the voting population might be less, but nonetheless, it has a higher population than Malawi. It's a bigger country. So 60 billion to me would sound probably about right. But the point I was trying to make was, you didn't even go into detail in terms of breaking down how this money was going to be spent. Do you not feel you owe Malawians an explanation, given the magnitude of this process and what is at stake? Do you not owe Malawians a detailed explanation as to exactly how you're going to spend this 42 billion kwacha? Why was that not clear when you announced the launch?
Our budget was so clear.
Did you break down everything?
Not on the launch. You
Yes,
know, the
why
launch, the focus of the launch was the activities that will be implemented during the electoral process, not the budget. The budget was just mentioned in passing, but the launch was meant to sensitize the public on the date of the elections, 1. 2, what will happen as we go towards the May 21, 2019 election. That was the focus of the launch program. That was the focus of the sensitization. But all stakeholders have the budget in full. We have never hidden our budget. It's very detailed. All the nitty-gritties of the budget as required are there.
You say
so there is nothing hidden in terms of the budget of the Malawi Electoral Commission.
You say stakeholders, yet the electorate have not been told what is in that budget and what you're spending it on. I think, if anything, we're probably, as the ones with the voting capacity, we probably have more say and should know more than these other stakeholders that you're referring to, surely. The person who's going to go to the poll needs to know that, don't they?
The Electoral Commission has a proposed budget, but mind you, this budget will pass through government. It's not yet approved. People have mentioned figures, but those figures are not approved by government. Wait until the 2018-2019 fiscal year budget session of Parliament. The figures that will be presented in Parliament and approved by Parliament will be the official figures that every Malawian will have a look at.
But that's rather late in the game, don't you think?
It's not late in the game.
I mean, we're 13 months away. Why should we wait until next year to know how much?
It's not next year. It's just a few months away. You know, the 2018-2019 fiscal.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you mean.
It's
okay.
coming
yes.
in June.
Right.
They'll be deliberating in June, and probably it will be passed in July.
But
even before that, we have shared this with stakeholders.
Who are these stakeholders?
And for the stakeholders that commented on relevant issues within the budget, those comments were taken on board. That's why I'm saying initially the budget was even higher than what you were talking about now.
But we can't afford it. That's probably why it was trimmed.
Not that we couldn't afford it, but we just have to look at things that can be taken out of the budget to ensure that what remains are critical issues in the budget without jeopardizing the results of the institution itself. Because at the end of the day, Malawi is waiting to see results. Not electional results, but results from the institution that it has delivered a credible election.
All right. Let me ask you this. Seeing as you're here and I have the pleasure and honor of having you sitting right next to me, can you tell me just roughly maybe one or two things that you're going to spend all that money on?
Thank you so much. I think there are a number of things, but I think what is eating quite a lot of the money you are talking about are allowances or payments to those field staff that work for the Malawi Electoral Commission.
So that's the bulk of the
those
budget?
People who you see registering the voters are not permanent staff of the Malawi Electoral Commission. Those are temporary staff. They have to be paid because they are not our staff. And those people who you see during polling are not permanent staff of the Malawi Electoral Commission. They are temporary staff. Those people have to be paid at the end of their 1 or 2 days jobs. That's where a lot of money goes.
But these are the same individuals who later on we learn have not actually been paid by Malawi Electoral Commission.
Let me clarify on that if you want me to.
Yes, please do.
The non-payment of some of the staff for the 2014 elections was due to some logistical challenges in terms of paying them. Initially, the Malawi Electoral Commission had wanted everybody to be paid through a bank account. Those people who were hired and provided their bank accounts were not the same people in all cases that went to do the job. For example, the police personnel. For other reasons, the police had to change the personnel that was supposed to go and do the police work for the Malawi Electoral Commission. So that was at a point where other personnel had already submitted their bank details. So during payment, those personnel who never went to work had received the payment. So Malawi Electoral Commission said we cannot pay those who actually went to work. The Malawi police has to make internal arrangements to ensure that those who had received the payment without working for it should give to those who had worked for the Malawi Electoral Commission. And
but the money was there.
The money, yes, they received the money.
No, as in when you had these logistical challenges, it's not as though you didn't have the funds.
No,
you had the funds.
No, the money was there. But they were paid to wrong people who never went to work.
All right.
And those wrong people were supposed to give that money to those who actually went on the ground to work.
All right.
Yes.
So you're telling me that of this 42 billion kwacha, which was once, according to you, over 60 billion when you were at your drawing boards, that 42 billion, you're saying the bulk of that is allowances.
Not allowances, payments to field staff.
In the form of
yes,
allowances,
not the bulk of that, a large chunk of that, yes.
Is it the biggest
chunk? And another chunk, not the biggest.
What is the biggest chunk going to?
No, I cannot say it from the head that this is the biggest chunk. But let me say that the other chunk is the logistics of moving materials, both during registration and voting, from the headquarters to the regions and then to the polling centers, the fuel that goes with that, the personnel that go with those materials, the distribution and the retrieval of those materials is very expensive as well. And you cannot compromise that with that. Because if you do, then you'll not have ballot papers in some centers, or you'll not have registration materials in some during registration process. So those are some of the things that make elections expensive.
Okay,
Yes.
well, I'm glad you've sort of cleared that. Of course, you're saying we need to wait until June to officially find out. But nonetheless, let's move on, Mr. Alufandika. Where are we with the funding in terms of how much of this money that you've actually secured? Because you obviously said earlier that resources are paramount. Have you secured all the funding that you need? We've also heard talk of how some CSOs don't have funding in order to participate. Now, whilst I recognize that it's not necessarily MEC's mandate to ensure they have funding, but MEC does still play a role and can still facilitate that process to make sure that all the relevant stakeholders perhaps are participating on an equal footing. So what is your response to that when we think of funding?
We are very fine in terms of funding.
You're very fine.
The government has committed itself to fully fund the MEC. And let me tell you that now we are using an electoral cycle approach to elections in Malawi. Mm-hmm. So the funding that you saw in the 2017-2018 budget for Malawi Electoral Commission had a component of the 2019 tripartite elections. So the government had already started funding the Malawi Electoral Commission even in 2017. And that has helped quite a lot because you know, most of the processes are done prior, way ahead of the elections, like voter registration. Mm-hmm. We will soon be going for voter registration. The government fully funded that activity. And
so you've got all the funding you need.
On top of the government, the development partners also are funding wherever gaps that we have, funding gaps. So we have funds from development partners, we have funds from government. Come 2018-2019 fiscal year, the government will put in the largest chunk of funding because 2019 is the election year. Polling will
so you'll only receive the rest of the funds next year?
Not next year. Come once the budget is approved in so June or July,
right.
Wherever they finish the budget session of Parliament. Once the budget is approved, you will know exactly how much the government is giving the Malawi Electoral Commission. At the moment, we are already in consultations with the Minister of Finance. So
when you say how much, meaning that there's potential that you might not get what you need?
Not at all.
Meaning that we could end up having challenges again?
If we don't get all that we need, we know the development partners will fill in the gap. But let me assure you this time around
have they said that for a fact?
The government has committed itself to fund the election more than it has ever done before.
Yes, it said that, but it's also said the same thing during by-elections, and then we've ended up postponing by-elections because they didn't have the funds. So
which ones?
But last time we had by-elections, they were delayed because we didn't have enough funding. So my point is, the government that you're referring to, which is you feel is going to give you that money, has also let us down in the past before. So that's really nothing to go by, is it?
There is a commitment from government to fund the elections in 2019. And we have seen that commitment being fulfilled within the 2017-2018 budget when we had requested government to fund us for the voter registration process and other activities that we are implementing between now and June, or even from last year. The government fully funded that. So we believe government commitment this time is really different from what you know.
And the CSOs, what's your response to that?
The CSOs, yes, there have been challenges in terms of funding CSOs, and this has affected the civic and votage question in Malawi. Yes, we have had meetings with CSOs. We work together. We have developed materials together already. So the materials are ready on the ground for implementation, but the issue of money is still being sorted out. As you are rightly saying, the Malawi Electoral Commission does not directly fund CSOs, but they are development partners. The CSOs have to put their house in order, one, to come up with the credible proposals for funding because nobody would want to put their money where they see no value for that money. So there has to be value for money first. It's not a question of, yes, we need money. Yes, you need money for what? So they have to make sure they put in credible proposals to the development partners who are ready to support them. You know, there is that commitment from development partners every time to support the CSOs. They're enjoying that support from development partners, and I believe they will get the support, but they have to ensure that they put up credible proposals for funding.
All right.
Yes.
Now, when all is said and done, after we've ironed out all these logistics, it's said that the elections are actually at the polls. So all things being equal, there shouldn't really be any variables. The only variables should be when we actually cast our ballot. That is where obviously there'll be differences. Everything else should be consistent, and there shouldn't be variables, right? Given what I've just said, to what extent do you feel these elections are going to be fair in that respect, particularly when we look towards the run-up to the actual day that we go to the polls? Is everything fair? What I'm referring to is, are we operating on equal footing in terms of political parties, media freedoms? Your own code of conduct makes it very clear that there should be impartiality when it comes to media houses. Yet we've always seen the state broadcaster giving preference to the government of the day. Now, I wonder, this time around, how far are you willing to go to ensure we don't see that kind of malpractice?
First, I have to say elections in Malawi are very open and transparent.
Yes.
Everybody witnesses the polling process. The ballot boxes are very transparent. You have monitors, both local and international, watching over the conduct of polling at every polling station in Malawi. That is transparency at its best. We are going beyond that to regulate even the environment which we are operating.
Are you?
As a country. That's where you are mentioning the code of conduct. We have codes of conduct, different ones. We have one for the media, as you mentioned. We have one for the chiefs, which is yet to be approved. We have one for even security personnel. We have a code of conduct for our own staff, how they should conduct themselves in the execution of their duties. But let me say this, for elections to be free and fair, it's not just the responsibility of the Malawi Electoral Commission. They are key stakeholders to the electoral process. If political parties decide to start fighting instead of coming up with clean campaigns, there isn't much we can do as Malawi Electoral Commission. So there has to be discipline, integrity within the pack of the electoral stakeholders in the country for us to have free and fair elections in 2019, starting with political parties as key stakeholders in the electoral process. They have to make sure they adhere to the code of conduct for political parties and candidates during the entire electoral process, not just on polling day, mind you.
That's right.
It's
That's
the
why
entire political process. There has to be sanity in the media fraternity. You mentioned quite a number of things that are going wrong. Recently, we visited all the media houses because of that. We want to move together. The media is an important stakeholder in the electoral process. They can make or break elections if you don't know. And we took time to meet the media just because we know how important they are. And we will continue to impress on every important electoral stakeholder to ensure that they play by the rules. You know, elections are to do with laws and regulations. And everybody, all stakeholders are supposed to follow this.
All right. Now, that's in an ideal world where we are following those rules and regulations and the guidelines which you have clearly laid out. But my question to you was on the basis of where somebody is flouting those regulations blatantly. So, for example, I've given examples of media houses, not just NBC, others who are clearly demonstrating that they're giving preferential treatment to a particular party. And I asked you how far you are willing to go to discipline these institutions, organizations, political parties, whatever stakeholder it may be, who you feel is perhaps not abiding by those codes of conduct. That is my question.
Outside the electoral period, that's the campaign period, There isn't much that we do because, you know, we have 2 months official campaign period.
Yes.
That one, the Electoral Commission is in charge.
Okay.
You know, we even do media monitoring to ensure that there is no bias in terms of media coverage. Outside the official campaign period, it becomes a problem when somebody is flouting the rules because our codes of conduct do not apply outside the election campaign period.
Right.
But we are really concerned, much as you are saying, that there are other media houses that conduct themselves unprofessionally. There are authorities in this country. MACRA is the...
Are you passing the buck, Mr. Alufandika?
We are not passing, but at every point, there has to be somebody responsible for action. And I'm mentioning MACRA because, as I said earlier on, outside the electoral period, we are not in charge of this. But within the electoral period, we can take charge.
Right.
So outside here, we are relying on MACRA. We are relying on Ministry of Information and other authorities to discipline those who are conducting themselves unprofessionally.
Okay.
That's the only way we can go.
And what charge are you going to take, like I said, if indeed we are in the election period and it's officially open, the 2 months that you're referring to, and there are stakeholders that are flouting the regulations, what are you going to do about it?
No, there are charges within the conducts. Within each electoral code of conduct, we stipulate the charges or the punitive measures that we take when somebody breaks.
And are you going to implement?
We do. Using our law enforcement agencies,
Okay.
will do that.
All right. In the interest of time, we've run out of time, I'm afraid, Mr. Alufandika. But my last question to you. Over the last few months, we've heard informal talk from MEC about perhaps even postponing these elections. Number one, how true is it that you were actually considering postponing the elections? And indeed, if that's the case, what kind of confidence should Malawians have that this is not going to happen? You were thinking of postponing till September, from what I understand, or we as the media understand.
The MEC is not and has never discussed the issue of postponing elections.
Never.
From May to September.
Never.
What I know is there was a proposal, whether from the MEC or other stakeholders, to say May may not be ideal for holding elections because of other factors like shorter days in May and June, you know that.
But we've always voted in
And,
May.
yes, with challenges. And you know, every proposal to change things is for the good of the nation, not for the bad. And the other thing is to do with rains. There are special rains in May than in August or September if you have to move the elections that way. But you know what? The date of elections in Malawi is embedded in the Constitution.
That's right. I was going to say that.
Nobody can change that.
Unless Parliament
approves it. And not just Parliament, it's something that may require also a referendum to change. There are a number of issues attached to this. If you change an election date, you may affect the term of office for a particular government.
That's right. That's why I brought up this question, because it has serious implications.
It has, and we are aware of that. Every Malawian is aware of that, including the Malawi Electoral Commission.
Okay.
But it's something that needs consideration. Not in this particular election, but maybe in the future. It may be in 2030,
All right.
whoever may take it. So it may not be affecting this election, but it's something that perhaps may still require some consideration, taking into account the issues that are kind of being brought forward, justifying the proposal.
All right.
Yes.
Sam Alufandika, thank you so much for joining us on Times Exclusive today. It was a pleasure having you in the studios, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to say until next time, but I'm not sure whether we'll have you in that seat again in the near future. Hopefully we will.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure indeed, and I'm hoping that we'll meet again to update you on the implementation of the process.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And hopefully by then you'll be able to give us more details about the budget.
Malawians have to know what is going on.
All right.
And we rely on you as the media to disseminate such information. So I'll be eager to come again and have another chat with you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If you're just tuning in, you were watching Times Exclusive with me, Wezi Kasambala, and I was talking to the Malawi Electoral Commission CEO, I beg your pardon, Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Sam Alufandika. But this is where we're going to have to leave it until next week. So from me, it's bye-bye for now.